Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We are joined today by Scott Ritter, a former intelligence officer in the U.S. Marines and a UN weapons inspector. So, yeah, welcome back to the program. It's good to have you back.
Thanks for having me on.
So, Trump recently threatened Russia and gave it a strange 50-day ultimatum, which Russia predictably dismissed. And this included announcing continued weapon shipments, which seemingly means that Trump has now finally abandoned his peace mandate and made this his own war. But this whole threat against Russia appears to have two components. That is, first, Europe have to buy the American weapons to fight Russia in Ukraine. And the second is the effort to decouple Russia from its partners by threatening this 100% secondary sanctions for anyone who trades with Russia. I was wondering how you're interpreting this new plan of Trump I'm not sure what the purpose is, to be honest, but how are you seeing the whole thing?
When he first published this plan, when he first talked about it, I was taken aback because there's never been a plan more guaranteed of failure than this plan. There's no legs, it has no chance, it's not sustainable, and it's not something that serves, for instance, as a foundation upon which you can then build. It will fail from the start. It is failing from the start. Let's start with the weapons deliveries. What weapons are being delivered? I mean, President talked about 17 Patriot batteries, a full complement, according to the president. I don't think there's 17 batteries. I don't think there's 5 batteries. I'd be surprised if you can find 2 batteries to be shipped right now. The Dutch are talking about sending something. The Germans are promising something down the road if they get a backfill, but they can't get a backfill unless you divert, for instance, Swiss Patriot orders, but the Swiss Patriot orders weren't scheduled for delivery until 2026, 2027. So if the Germans are going to wait for the back order to be delivered, that means the Ukrainians aren't going to see a Patriot battery delivered until 2026, 2027. The last time I checked, it's July 2025, and I may be a dumb Marine and math ain't my forte, but I can tell you right off the bat that July 2025, it's a long way to go to get to 2026. And I can also tell you that last night the Russians fired 450 drones into Ukraine. Not the largest number. They've sent almost twice that many on nights, and they're gearing up production, according to Italian newspapers that toured the production facility in Tatarstan. 1,000 drones a day are being produced. If we're producing 1,000 drones a day, that means you're preparing to launch 1,000 drones a day. And so I'm just looking at this saying, what the hell was Donald Trump smoking when he said this? And the point is, it makes no sense. It's a policy doomed to fail. Now you take a look at the economic aspect of this. It's not so much the sanctions against Russia. Russia could care less. In fact, when this was announced, the Russian stock market apparently increased value 2.7% because the Russians thrive under sanctions. And so there you go. But this promises secondary sanctions against China, India, Brazil, and other nations that are consuming Russian oil under the premise that if you can stop them from buying Russian oil, the Russians don't have the money to continue to fund their war, etc. Well, China's already committed to doubling down on Russia, meaning China knows full well that what's going on in Ukraine, there before the grace of God will happen to Taiwan if they don't stop it right now in Ukraine. So this conflict is a Chinese conflict. They're all in to make sure Russia prevails. And to give you a hint of where the Chinese will stand if we are dumb enough to put these sanctions on China, Europe passed their 18th tranche of sanctions. And the Chinese have come back and said that, because apparently 3 Chinese companies were included in these sanctions. And the Chinese said, if you really want to commit suicide, go ahead, but we will punch back and we pump out hard. We will knock your ass out. Reconsider what you're doing. And Europe will, because they have no choice, because they don't hold any cards here, nor does the United States hold any cards with China. If you recall, back in April, the president put sanctions on China. I can't remember the number, the percentage. It doesn't matter because it didn't happen. He had to immediately back down and extend the sanctions for 90 days. Now they're extended through August, I guess. They never happened. The Chinese responded by cutting off all deliveries of rare earth minerals and magnetic materials to the United States, destroying the American automobile manufacturing base because you can't produce a car without access to these minerals. Um, we don't have any alternative source. The Ukrainian rare earth mineral deal is on paper, it's not real. Congo, the three guys that Trump sent to negotiate this with the Congolese leadership ended up fleeing for their lives. Um, where else can you get it? Myanmar, I guess, but that's all going to China. Where else can you get rare earth minerals? I guess you're stuck. Afghanistan, Chinese got that one too. Um, so, the Chinese own us. And if we impose these sanctions, this mistake that was made, which was destroying the American automobile industry, only was recently rectified, I guess, in June, where they finally negotiated some sort of agreement. The Chinese should just pull the plug. They don't need us. They'll pull the plug and they'll collapse. China's not going to play this game. It's stupid. It's the most predictable outcome. Brazil has said, if you don't want to trade with us, we don't want to trade with you. Therefore, it doesn't matter what you do. We'll just cut you off. And India, at some point in time, India is going to have to get off the fence. And I don't believe that India will sacrifice its sovereignty for the insane unpredictability of the Trump administration when they are part of BRICS, part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, part of the G20. And, that's the direction of their economic future. So I personally don't believe these sanctions will ever be implemented. I believe that this is a gimmick that was, I believe Lindsey Graham would like to see them implemented. According to him, it'll be opening up a can of whoop ass on Putin. He's been watching one too many examples of the water boy. Lindsey Graham is so irrelevant, such a non-player, such a non-entity. He just provides political cover, because now it's the Senate asking for these sanctions. Trump has agreed to it, but he's waited 50 days. So what is Trump waiting for? Because I don't believe these weapons deliveries will have any impact and the sanctions won't have any impact. And I think the key to this comes in with Seymour Hersh's most recent Substack article, where he says that the Trump administration is actively moving to get Volodymyr Zelensky removed from office. This is the only thing a 50-day pause makes sense of. This is a chance for regime change in Ukraine, to have Zelensky replaced with somebody. Tsai believes it's going to be Zelensky, the former commander. I don't think Zelensky is a qualified candidate. I don't think if he is picked, he'll be a very temporary candidate because the Russians will not accept him. This is a man who took a selfie with Stepan Bandera's photograph in the back, posing next to an Azov Nazi. So, no. I think the direction we're heading now is the elimination of the Zelensky government and the implementation of elections in Ukraine that will be geared towards producing a government sympathetic to the Russian demands. And from this, you will be able to navigate towards a eventual ceasefire and conflict termination. And I think this is the path that Trump is taking. He can't say it because it's a loss of face. But I think, Trump will say, we will agree to the peace that the Ukrainian government will agree to. But right now, you can't agree to a peace the Ukrainian government agrees to because Zelensky's government won't agree to peace. The solution is to get rid of Zelensky's government. And I think that's what this 50-day pause is designed to do.
Because Trump said he was disappointed in Putin and because he didn't want to make a deal. But it is unclear what deal he's referring to, though, because in the beginning of his administration, Hegseth seemingly recognized that peace would require neutrality to be restored in Ukraine and also to make some territorial concessions, as the Russians would say, to take into account for the changes on the reality on the ground. But Trump referred to as ceasefire. Is this essentially, is he pushing the same deal as Starmer, Macron, or Merz, or what deal are they trying to sell to the Russians? Is it just an unconditional ceasefire?
Look, Trump doesn't know what deal he wants because he doesn't understand anything about Ukraine. Neither does Hegseth, neither does Rubio, neither does Kellogg, neither does anybody. Trump, you have to evaluate the Trump position not by what we normally would use as the benchmark for evaluating policy, but how it impacts Donald Trump politically, personally. He's a narcissist, an ego maniac, and his policies are ego-driven. What he's looking for here is a political victory. He wants it to be said that he, Donald Trump, facilitated into this conflict. He wants it done in a manner where he comes out as the conquering hero. But even Hegseth, I mean, from the start, and I believe you and I have had this conversation before, territorial concessions being made on Russia's behalf. Well, wait a minute. There's no concession to be given to Russia. Russia owns the territory in question. Who is the United States to concede anything to Russia? Russia's taken it by force, and they will continue to take it by force. Russia's not looking for concessions. Russia owns that territory. It belongs to Russia, and Russia will kill every Ukrainian who decides to stay on that territory. And the United States and Europe can't stop it. That's what Pete Hegseth doesn't understand. That's what Keith Kellogg doesn't understand. That's what Donald Trump doesn't understand. You can no sooner ask Russia to negotiate away the right bank of Kherson than you could ask the United States to negotiate away Southern California. And I know there's some MAGA Republicans out there who would be very happy if Southern California was negotiated away. But the bottom line is the territorial integrity of the United States is set in stone. And so is the territorial integrity of the Russian Federation. And as things stand, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk are part of the Russian Federation. Moreover, Hegseth needs to understand that the United States started this war, not Russia. Indeed, it was the Trump administration's first term that created the conditions for this current conflict, and that the Trump administration's efforts to arm the Ukrainian military. If you remember, in 2015, we started training Ukrainian soldiers in Western Ukrainian bases. By 2016-17, during the Trump administration, we were talking about training 500 Ukrainians every 55 days to send them east to kill Russians in the Donbass. That was our purpose for doing this, and that's under Trump. So, the fact is, we're the ones who caused this war. We're the ones who created this war. We're not going to be the ones who get to dictate the outcome. I mean, why would the Russians listen to us? This is like asking the arsonist how to fight the fire he started, and asking, the arsonist gets put in jail. America is an arsonist. We're a geopolitical arsonist, and we've set fire to Ukraine, and the Russians are the firefighters, and they're going to put the fire out on their terms. And they want to put the fire out in a way that the fire doesn't restart. That means they have to address the root cause of this conflict. These are things the United States doesn't want to address, nor are we capable of addressing, because frankly speaking, we don't comprehend it. There's not too many people in Washington, D.C. that can speak effectively and accurately and responsibly on the complexities of the Ukrainian question. In order to do that, you have to understand the history properly, etc. We have Keith Kellogg, who doesn't know a damn thing about Ukraine other than what the Western Ukrainian nationalists have told him. We have Marco Rubio, who simply colors every thought coming out of his head with "I hate Russia," and we have Pete Hegseth, who no disrespect intended, but he's dumber than a box of bricks, especially when it comes to Russia. So, who is advising our president? My president, not your president. My president. Our president, when we speak of the world being held hostage to the most powerful position in the world, the American presidency. Unfortunately for Ukraine, for Europe, for the world, because of the incompetence of the United States, I think you're going to see this conflict continue until Russia physically destroys Ukraine and until Europe physically destroys itself.
Well, it seems if now we see the Russians are winning, and not if we are seeing this, and this means that also, given that Russia sees this as an existential threat, they're not going to be able to, do any compromises on the key issues. So a key problem has been the unwillingness of Zelensky to make any significant concessions. So for this reason, the Russians reached a conclusion I think a long time ago, that it wouldn't be possible to get a peace agreement with Zelensky in power. With these new reports, do you see it as the United States or the Trump administration at least reaching the same conclusion, that it's simply not possible with Zelensky, or is the thought about replacing Zelensky with solution is simply about Zelensky losing a lot of support among his own people, and not just the public, but there seems to be some cracks emerging in the political elites as well. In other words, is this regime change of Zelensky to pursue a peace, or just to refresh or restore some of the Ukrainian government?
Well, the Russian problem runs deeper than just Zelensky. What they say is any solution, any agreement has to be signed by a legitimate authority. And Zelensky is not that legitimate authority. So that's the only problem Zelensky poses, is his elimination. Once he's eliminated, you can replace him with a legitimate authority. But the legitimate authority, all they're good for is signing a deal dictated by Russia. The legitimate authority isn't going to have, if you remove Zelensky and replace him with somebody else, they're not going to be able to come in and say, well, my name's not Zelensky, therefore you must give us this, that, and the other thing. Ukraine gets nothing. Ukraine has lost this war. Europe gets nothing. There will be no concessions made. Getting rid of Zelensky opens the door toward creating a government capable of legally accepting the terms of surrender dictated by Russia. That's it. And for that reason, I don't pay too much attention to the crumbling of Ukraine's governance from the standpoint of, that shows dissent, people breaking free, wanting this, that, wanting peace. Nobody in the Ukrainian government wants peace. They want a continuation of the corruption that has allowed them to buy sports cars, mansions, etc., to move resources offshore. Watch how quick they all flee when the wall comes tumbling down. There won't be any of the Ukrainian officials that are currently there remaining behind to face the music. They will be gone. And this is the resistance you're seeing because of Zelensky right now. The Ukrainian elite, political and economic elite, are saying that he is costing them access to that which enriched them. That is the resources of the West pouring in. And that's why they dislike Zelensky, not because of any posture or anything. It's purely a results-based analysis. Are we able to continue to enrich ourselves with the funding brought in? Is Zelensky able to go out and rattle the tin can and get people to put money in the tin can that we can then steal and enrich ourselves? Or is the money drying up? Therefore, we need somebody new, a Zelensky, to come in. From their perspective, Zelensky would be the darling of the West, and the money would just be triple because now the West would say, oh my gosh, Zelensky, he's the man. But the Russians don't care. They're not going to sit there and go, oh, well, because the West now likes Zelensky, we have to concede. The Russians will just continue the war until Zelensky likewise leaves. The entire Ukrainian government is corrupt, and Russia's not going to deal with any of them. They will not be part of a post-conflict Ukraine because if you're talking about the root cause of this conflict, the Ukrainian ruling elite is the root cause. They will not be allowed to stay. They will not be allowed to remain. They may not even be allowed to reside. They may be arrested, put in camps, put on trial, or compelled to flee. But no, they won't be part of any post-Ukraine. The more I listen to the Russians, the more I look at how the Russians are structuring themselves right now to try and, there's an interesting book. It's a work of fiction, but it's called Armageddon, written by Leon Uris. And it's a book about the Berlin crisis at the end of World War II. But the way the book starts is it talks about the problems of military government and how the United States had to prepare for military government, for post-conflict Germany. And we were preparing for military government midway through the war, And I think the Russians are at that stage right now. While they haven't defeated the Ukrainians, they haven't eliminated their government. The Russians are preparing for post-conflict reality, and they will have a government ready to move in. And that's what the world needs to start preparing for, is the inevitability of Russia dictating what the future of Ukraine will look like from the top to the bottom.
What do you see being the role of the Europeans in all of this? Because, again, part of Trump's deal was America will sell weapons to the Europeans, and the Europeans will then be allowed to donate this to Ukraine to fight Russia. But the Europeans seem somewhat divided. The Italians, and I think the French as well, aren't too interested in spending the money they don't really have. I mean, they're both going bankrupt fairly soon. And on weapons, but Germany and the United Kingdom, they still seem somewhat, still gung-ho on war. Indeed, the Political recently had an article where Merz and Starmer was meeting, and apparently they found a common cause in war, that this is the only thing seemingly going for them. Now, the British aren't really that big of a surprise. They always tend to position themselves as the most anti-Russian force, I think partly to make themselves a reliable major partner of the United States in Europe. But for the Germans, this is something very different than what we only saw a few years ago. Do you think that they would take this further if they now see Ukraine beginning to collapse? So, would they spend money they don't have for these weapons America don't have, or would they actually enter the war themselves?
Oh, you can't enter a war unless you're capable of entering a war. As I've said, Germany can't deploy 4,000 troops to Lithuania to get their Lithuania Nazi brigade up and running. How do we expect them to suddenly form the 4th Panzer Army, the 3rd Panzer Army, the 6th Army, the 9th Army, the 8th Army, to replicate the forces of the Third Reich? They don't have the resources to do that. You have Merz and his tongue, but what's it backed with? Even Rheinmetall, the military-industrial complex, how many tanks can they produce? Where will they get the steel? Where will they get the money? Germany is bankrupt. They don't have they don't have Audi. It's a fascinating video, but they're not selling cars, so they have to destroy cars that they produce because they're not able to sell them. But there's not a functioning economy right now in Germany. It's a collapsing economy. And you have a situation where Europe is starting to say, in order to free up money for this irresponsible military spending, we have to start cutting social programs and, touching the things that made Europe a great place to live. The idea of, the French and their 4-day work week. I mean, who wouldn't want a 4-day work week? The Germans and their paid vacations. I mean, they were the envy of the world. Now that's going away. Healthcare is going away. Education, everything's going away. Europe is collapsing into third world status because of the insanity of these warmongers that are trying to rewrite history. I mean, if I hear Merz one more time say, we won't make the same mistake. Well, what mistake did you make, Merz? Because he's talking about we're going to do it right this time. Do what right? Invade Russia the right way? You won't make the same mistake? That means you want to do something that you already did, and the implication is you want to basically repeat what happened in the Second World War. Please repeat it, because I will love the outcome. Then we'll have T-90 tanks on the plinths outside of the Reichstag, as opposed to T-34-85s. These are two of the most grossly irresponsible leaders Europe has ever had. I mean, I don't know why. And to be frank, I know it's not you, but Norwegians. And you have your own history of quislings. And you know what it was like to live under Nazi occupation. And you understand the irresponsibility of those Norwegians who sided with Nazi Germany and fought alongside Nazi Germany. And I hope that your society continues to hate them and revile them. I can't imagine anybody in Norway saying, oh, we wish for the good old days of quisling. And yet, that's what's happening in Germany right now. Where are the Norwegian voices to say no? No. Where are the European voices? Where are the Dutch voices? Where are the Belgian voices? Where are the French voices? Where is all of Europe that was occupied by the Third Reich? Why do they believe that an expansive Germany would simply turn its eyes east? Where are the Poles? Because to get to Russia, you got to go through Poland. And yet this is what Merz is talking about, literally talking about. How do you get those German tankers who say they want to shoot to kill Russians? No, you don't, guys. The Russians will kill you. They did it before. I don't know why the Germans forgot that. And the Bundeswehr is not the Wehrmacht. Okay, the Bundeswehr is full of beer-drinking, schnitzel-eating fat men who don't know how to fight, have never done a day's worth of exercise in their life. And if they went to war against the hardened killers that currently populate the Russian military, they'll be slaughtered in a week. This is fantasy. It angers me because I can't believe we're sitting here in a day and age where we're watching it happen again, watching the Germans try to become the Fourth Reich. And nobody's saying anything. The silence of the world as this happens, except the Russians, but apparently the Russians aren't allowed to say anything because they're evil and they're bad. The good news is I don't think Merz is going to last the year. I think the German economy is such that he will have a vote of no confidence and that there will be an election and he'll be tossed out on his ear. And I think Starmer is going to face the same music. He's one of the most wildly unpopular leaders in England, and as he continues to spout this madness, it'll be rejected. And the other good news is, I mean, the economic collapse of Europe is tragic for the European people, but maybe good for the world. Because I don't know how many more times the British have to go through this cycle of elections till they realize that their nuclear deterrence is unaffordable. And maybe we can get the British nuclear deterrence taken care of, where they just self-demobilize because they can't afford their new submarines and their Trident missiles and all this. And look at the French with their economic collapse. Wouldn't it be nice if the French likewise came to the determination that they can't afford these submarines? And now we're starting to look at a potential of real nuclear nonproliferation, because if you eliminate the French and the British independent nuclear deterrence, and the only reason I'm bringing this up is because they just had the Northwoods Declaration where France and England came together and said, no, our nuclear umbrella is going to cover all of Europe. No, it shouldn't cover Europe because you're not responsible enough, because you two morons are talking about sending conventional forces into Ukraine to fight the Russians and trigger a war that will then inevitably lead to a nuclear exchange. Britain and France can't be trusted with nuclear weapons. So the collapse of Europe could lead to the unilateral disarmament, and that frees up the United States and Russia now to negotiate responsibly. Because in the history of our arms control negotiations, we've always been hindered by the NATO nuclear deterrent and the fact that we refuse to put the British and French nuclear arsenals on the table when talking about numbers. Yeah, but no, Europe, what you said, what about Europe? Your question was, what about Europe? Europe doesn't matter. Europe doesn't count. Europe is nothing, one giant nothing burger. Europe is going to rot. Europe is collapsing. Europe will go through political upheaval. And, the Russians will sit there and say, we didn't want this. Russia doesn't want that. Why would Russia want instability on its western borders? What Russia wanted was stability. What Russia wanted was responsible trading partners. What Russia wanted was, a peaceful coexistence. But that's not what Europe has offered. That's not what Europe is offering. And Europe as it's currently configured will never offer that, because Europe as it's currently configured can only survive by creating the specter of a Russian threat that doesn't exist. We just had the newly appointed commander of European forces, General Christopher Donahue, at a Euro-land war conference in Wiesbaden, talk about how quickly NATO forces can take over Kaliningrad. NATO forces won't get 1 kilometer into Kaliningrad before nuclear weapons pop off all over NATO. That's what he doesn't seem to understand, is that Kaliningrad doesn't exist in isolation, that it's tied into the defenses of the Russian Federation. And the last time I checked the Russian Constitution, Kaliningrad is considered to be a constitutional part of the Russian Federation. And if NATO were to invade it, you would be creating an existential threat to the physical integrity of the Russian Federation, and NATO and Europe would disappear from the face of the earth in a nuclear holocaust. That's what Christopher Donahue doesn't understand. Apparently nobody in Europe understands this as well. Europe needs to grow up, wake up, or just die already. Go away. I'm personally tired of Europe, fed up with Europe. I imagine the Russians are as well. And America will become fed up with Europe because you don't bring anything to the table. Not a damn thing. You don't bring a functioning economy. You don't bring national pride. My God, the Germans, we're sitting here talking about the Germans as if the Fourth Reich is something pipeline, and they still won't look us in the face and say, shame on you. I mean, I don't know if you saw Tucker Carlson's conversation with the Bild. Yeah, The Germans should just roll over and fade away. They're embarrassing. The total lack of they posture tough against Russia, but when push comes to shove, they are the most compliant group of beta cucks I've ever met in my life. And I apologize for injecting that thought into this conversation, but that pretty much defines Germany and much of Europe today.
Well, it's remarkable how quickly Europe became so insignificant politically, economically, militarily. And I think this is a great fear of Europe that America's leaving and there's no, then Europe's relevance will go with it. And well, when you spoke now, I thought about J.D. Vance when he told Europeans, we don't need vassals, we need allies. It's kind of sad when your masters in Washington have to tell you to stop being vassals, but
Yeah.
it is it is a sad decline. So European. My main concern is, given this whole time over the past few years now, you could see that the military division of Europe, that this would lead to the irrelevance, that it would lead to economic decline, and yet the people who pursued this path, they kind of monopolized on patriotism. That if you care about our countries, this is the path you take. And as you said, now look at Germany again with a failing economy. Talks now openly banning the main opposition party, backing genocide in Gaza, and the only foreign policy now appears to be war on Russia, which is, and as you pointed out, I don't think the other Europeans would respond that favorably once this, if this German army ever gets off its feet. But,
The irony is, if you go back and look at Germany in the 1930s during the Weimar Republic and the transition, they could put strong German men in the field to do calisthenics, and you looked at them and you went, that's military stock right there. Those boys are fit. How many Germans today put the flag of their country on their shoulder with pride? How many Germans run around and say, I am a German. That flag is my national symbol. I will die for that flag. Or have the Germans bought into this Euro rot where they're part of a greater European continuity and they're ashamed of defining themselves as Germans? And I think that's a problem with a lot of Europe right now, is that they've bought into this European Union stuff, which stands for nothing, and they've forgotten who they are. And ultimately, in order to have a viable military, you have to have a group of physically fit, and I want to reemphasize that, physically fit young men who are ready to die for their country. Not conscripts. Everybody's talking about how they're going to use conscription to bring their military up. Conscription in a modern war is a recipe for disaster. First of all, conscripts will never be able to handle the modern equipment of war effectively. Second, their motivation. They're conscripted. That means they didn't want to join the military to begin with. And Europe doesn't have this. This is why you have shrinking militaries. Nobody wants to join. And it's expensive to have an all-volunteer force. And that's one of the reasons why I've stopped worrying about Germany a long time ago. I'm angry. I'm furious. But I don't fear Germany mobilizing a new Wehrmacht, because I don't think Germany has enough men. They barely are able to put out the financial incentives to get enough people to volunteer to serve in the Lithuanian brigade, because constitutionally Germany can't deploy conscript forces outside of Germany beyond that against their will. So you can't. It's not like the United States. You join the military and they go, well, we're sending you off to Afghanistan. Well, you can't do that. Well, you have to volunteer in Germany. And they're barely able to get enough. They haven't even gotten enough yet for this Lithuanian brigade. So how in God's name do they think they're going to motivate 500,000 German boys to join the military? And are there 500,000 physically fit German boys? I'm talking about people that wake up in the morning, play sports, can put 90 pounds on their back, hike 25 miles, in function. Modern societies don't produce warriors anymore. We produce chair-bound people who, have bad circulation because they spend all day in a desk playing computer games. You put them in a gym, they can't lift the bar, let alone put 120 pounds on their back and go. This is the sad fact that faces Europe and the United States. I mean, we have our own obesity problems. One of the, when we take a look at our own population is not capable of producing warriors in sufficient numbers right now. And it's a problem for an all-volunteer force of the size of the United States, because we had to make so many concessions in order to make recruitment goals that now when you take a look at a U.S. military formation on the parade deck or, exercising, it's a joke. It's like coming to, a fat camp, and a bunch of overweight people, desperately trying to get in shape. Only the Marine Corps and a handful of Army units maintain the, combat, the physical capacity. The European military today, they don't have this physical fitness, this capability. War is about more than technology. War, at the end of the day, and we see this in Ukraine, comes down to hardened men on the ground, willing to eat mud, breathe cordite, and shove a bayonet down the throat of the bad guy. And unless you're able to function in that environment, you're going to lose the next war. And Europe right now, they can't. It's the European, collectively, Europe's militaries are universally not prepared to wage high-intensity conflict of the sort that's being fought in Ukraine today.
And I fear you're correct that this war will not just destroy Ukraine. I think it will destroy Europe, at least in its current form. But it's I think future generations will look back at 2014 and the years after, and the foolishness of continuing this, even when the consequences became known, and we kept looking the other way. Anyways, thank you so much for your time. I hope you can come back again soon.
Okay, thanks a lot. Have a good day.